Well, we come to the life of Lot in our next series. I kind of did a little bit of a backtrack. I'd gone forward to Jacob and Esau, but I wanted to treat of Lot, and I just sort of forgot. So anyway, we're just taking a brief backtrack. Lot was a contemporary of Abraham. Frankly, he was also a nephew of him, and so on, sort of cousin. So we see that in looking at him, I want to study the life of Lot. It's a kind of a study in the what we call the cardinal sin of sloth, sometimes pronounced sloth. And it's interesting, isn't it, that Lot, the name Lot, is right in the middle of the word sloth. But Lot was, he illustrates this problem that we have of sloth. Now, I'll explain how in a minute, but first of all, what is sloth? So sloth is sorrow or sadness or some kind of strange aversion to the good things that God is offering. So the Lord gives us his scriptures. He gives us graces. He gives us the liturgy, the sacraments. He gives us experiences in prayer. And we're like, oh, that sounds like a lot of work. And so Thomas speaks of kind of as almost an impressive sorrow. And we know we ought to desire these things, but we just don't. And that's sloth. All right. Now then, sloth is not always the same as laziness, by the way. Some people stay very, very active to avoid spiritual things. I'm too busy. I can't pray. I can't go to church. I can't, take a retreat or really look at my life and where I'm going. And, I'm just so busy, And so there's a sorrow or aversion, but it isn't a laziness. The person's working very hard to avoid God. So don't just equate it. It often manifests as a kind of a laziness. But it's not always laziness, and that's the point. Now, Lot's personal troubles were many, but for our purposes, his problems begin when it says here in Genesis 13, he pitched his tent towards Sodom. Now, what happened was when they came back from Egypt, both Abraham and Lot had large flocks, and they realized that the land that they were staying in close to wasn't really enough for both of them to stay close together. So he told Lot, you pick some part of the land that you want and go there, and I'll stay in another part, and that'll be good for our flocks. All right. Well, Lot chose the better part for himself. He chose the region that's today a rift valley. It's a howling desert. It's terrible because of all the terrible volcanic and seismic things that have happened in that region. But that said, at the time, it was a land that was green with pastures, and it was described of as quite beautiful and verdant. So Lot picks the better part, so to speak, for himself. And it says here again, as he went down there, this is near the area today of the Dead Sea. And so you can see how different it is today. There's nothing verdant about the Dead Sea areas. Howling desert is really what it is. Anyway, all that said, he pitched his tent toward Sodom. Now, Sodom was a very wicked city. We often, the first thing we usually think of today, where we get saved, for example, the word sodomy, that this just was an area where homosexuality was openly practiced, and it was. However, there were other things too. There was great injustice to the poor. There was an awful lot of various forms of injustice that Isaiah also speaks of. Now, with all that in mind, Lot pitches his tent toward this city, which is a way of saying he became connected with it. He became, in some way enamored with it. He was attracted to it. Okay, there is here the idea that this wicked city. It wasn't just Lot. Of course, he had a family. We know at least that he had 2 daughters and a wife, but we don't know if there were other children or not. But at the end of the day, he not only exposes himself to the terrible sins of Sodom, but also to his family, and we'll see that all of them in some way are going to suffer from this. Now, see, if you're going to swim in muddy waters, you're going to come out muddy, and that mud gets into your ears and into your soul. And Lot risked a lot, shall I say, Lot risked many things when he pitches his tent towards Sodom. And many of us, too, we don't think very much about the consequences when we pitch our tent toward the internet or YouTube or TikTok or, things that can have some all right things, but are often things that are very dangerous to our spiritual well-being and, frankly, our emotional and psychic well-being, because there's often so much violence, negativity, and raw sexuality in these sites and so on. So, again, we're not so different from Lot. We don't want to just say, "Oh, look at that guy Lot." You know, at some level, Lot made a huge mistake here, but we also see that we often do the same. We don't. How many parents really monitor what their kids are watching or listening, the music they're listening to, or what have you? See, again, all of these are things that we all can sort of pitch our tent toward the world, see, and we'll find a number of issues there that will cause not just us harm, but even, again, our family harm. So, all right, now, as Lot is there, the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah reach heaven, and God comes to look it over, so to speak, and find out if the reports are that bad. All right. So they are. But that said, God comes to look it out. And Abraham kind of negotiates with God. He says, well, what if there were 50 or 40 or 30 or 20 righteous? Would you destroy it then? No. What he has his mind all this time, Lot. He says, basically, I got some family there. And I wonder if you could not destroy the city, at least until they're gone, And so God Abraham sort of negotiates with God a bit, and God says, all right, I won't. So he sends two angels in the form of, they look and appear as men, but they're angels. He sends two angels to investigate, and while they're there, they stay with Lot. And they are, therefore, then all of a sudden the men of that city found out that these two young men have come into the city, and they go and bang on Lot's door and say, send them out because we want to have sexual relations with them. And Lot says, no, what a terrible thing, and so on. Now, I won't go through all of what he does, but it's pretty awful. I mean, they're proposing essentially homosexual rape, but beyond that, there is this... that Lot, in order to try to prevent that, proposes to send one of his daughters out so they can have their way with her. And again, all of this startles us, you see. And as I said, Lot's got a lot of troubles, and it isn't just, that he pitched his tent towards Sodom. But Abraham has been praying for him. So these angels come, and they're going to try to rescue Lot. And it really is only Abraham's prayers that save Lot, all right? So don't forget the power of prayer, and don't forget to pray for those, who are locked in very deep sins and so on. But anyway, here comes the heart of the story regarding Sloth. The angel warns Lot and says, flee. But Lot hesitates. Fleeing is hard work, It means leaving things behind that you like. Perhaps Lot thinks, well, maybe the warnings of this destruction are overblown. Come on, it can't be that bad, and so on. But here's what the story says. As dawn was breaking, the angels urged Lot on, saying, on your way, take with you your wife and your two daughters who are here with you, or you'll be swept away in the punishment of Sodom. But Lot hesitated. And so the men sent by the Lord, who were really angels, when he hesitated, the men sent by the Lord's mercy seized his hand and the hands of his wife and two daughters and dragged them to safety outside the city. Okay, so you see, they've got to manhandle and get him out of there because he's like, oh man, that's a lot of trouble to flee right now. Really, is it that bad? You see the idea. God is offering you a merciful reprieve from the destruction. And he's like, wow, it's a lot of work. Okay, you get the idea. Now, as soon as they had been brought outside of the city, that is, Lot was told, now, he says, flee for your life. Don't look back. Don't stop anywhere on the plain. Get off to the hills at once, or you will be swept away. Oh, no, my lord, said Lot. You have already thought enough of your servant to do me the great kindness of intervening to save my life, but I can't flee to the hills to keep disaster from overtaking me, and so I shall die. Look at this town ahead. That's near enough to escape to. Can I go to this more nearby town? Do I really have to go, in other words, all the way up to those mountains? That's a lot of trouble. Maybe I could come to go to a nearby place. What do you think? and let me flee there to that small town. And they said, well, then, they replied, I will also grant you this favor that you now ask. I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but hurry, escape there. I cannot do anything until you're out of here and arrive there. That is why the town was called Zoar. Okay. Now, so you see, Lot's lazy. He settled in. It's all too much trouble to flee, even if it's for your life. Come on, you know. And many of us, again, we think very little of our spiritual life, you know, what immorality does to our body as well as our soul. And so you start to see it's kind of this, that's just too much, right? So Lot has become lazy. He's settled in now. He settled down with his sins and with a sinful world. He'd rather he'd rather even accept death than have to make major changes in his life. See, and he can't even manage to rouse himself to save his family. See, if it were just him, but it's his family, he just too much trouble. Come on. But thanks to Abraham's prayers, the angels literally then drag Lot and his family out of the city, and they repeat the warning, flee, flee. And again, but Lot still sees this as just too much trouble. And again, I've already gone through that with you. These hills are pretty far away. How about this closer town? All right, so you see. Now, here's another aspect of sloth, namely compromising with evil despite its dangers. Even if it occurs to many that some things in their lives need to be changed, they try to minimize those changes, right? The Lord tells us that we cannot serve two masters, right? That we cannot serve both the world and Him. And yet we see that we have to decisively choose between the world or God. But an awful lot of us, many realizing that this could introduce uncomfortable situations into our life where we can't just go and have fun with all the sinners. It might have financial impacts. Again, it sometimes makes their life a little harder, all of these things. Isn't it just enough that I do a few holy things, check off the God box, get to Mass on Sunday, and kind of not beat my wife and pay my taxes? Isn't that enough? Do I really have to have heroic virtue? Do I really need to make a decisive break with the world? Really? Is it that bad? Yes. But again, you start to see this. Now, here's the sad results, you see. They do get there, and Lot is there, and but note this, grace and mercy need to have their effect. We can't go on in sloth forever. We have to allow God to begin to address this deep drive of aversion or sorrow or sadness at the good things He's offering, or we will be destroyed. But you start to see that his wife was so attached she couldn't, and she did turn back and look at Sodom as it was being destroyed. And she turned to a pillar of salt. They had told him, don't look back. Now again, think of Sodom as an image of the world. And they say, go, flee, don't look back. But she does, and she turns to a pillar of salt. So he's lost his wife to Sodom. But his two daughters are also pretty screwed up. They actually decide that, well, we don't have husbands, and this is going to be a while before we can find them, so let's get our father drunk and have sexual relations with him and have children by him. And that's incest, of course, and it's a terrible sin. And you start to see they too were corrupted by what Sodom did, you see. Unnatural, or shall we say, relations that are forbidden, and again, all of these are ways of saying that, you see, it really hurt, it harmed his family. And so the question, I think, for all of us is, if we're not willing to, repent for our own sake, could we maybe repent for the sake of others? So we don't become a bad example to them? Can we possibly spend some time considering the toll that not raising my family in the faith, or just myself becoming too accustomed to sin and being too lazy to root it out, and letting my family be exposed to it day in and day out? Does it ever occur that if you won't get well for your own sake, that you could at least get well for somebody else's sake? Even then, some people just think, nah, my kids will complain. They all want their iPhone and, all the other kids, and it's too much trouble. And so you just don't engage the battle. See? And that's the danger. Or what happens to a pastor when, once again, I don't want all this tension. I'm not going to talk about complicated moral issues and things that make me unpopular, and it's just too much trouble. People get upset. I'll have to explain, and they'll send a letter to the bishop, and it's just too much trouble. So you just kind of get up there and say vagaries, abstractions and generalities. We don't engage the battle, and likewise, things like calling or summoning people to prayer, summoning them to come to some church activity that we hope will help them in their journey. Oh no, I don't want to bother them. These are the things that can infect priests too. I certainly struggle with some of that myself. And so, with all that in mind, we have a story here about what sloth does. Sloth is sorrow or sadness at the good things that God is offering, even an aversion to them. Now, what are the antidotes to sloth? Well, joy and zeal. So we want we want to have joy in what God is offering. So, Lord, make me happy and excited about the things you're offering me. Things like getting free of sins and all their bad effects, living a life that's more joyful, beginning my way towards heaven, and one day the glory of heaven with joys unspeakable and glories untold. And you're like, yeah, well, see what's on TV tonight. No, Lord, give me joy, and then zeal to want to do what it takes to get there. Let me keep my eyes on the prize. So pray for the virtues of joy and zeal. And these are gifts that help to fight sloth. But we see that Lot started, again, I'm not saying it all started just at that moment. He had problems before, but at the end of the day, Lot did pitch his tent towards Sodom. He was enamored with the world, and so are some of us. And you start to see he gets very attached to the things, even though there's a very sinful city, and he's rather shocked by the conditions there. In fact, the letter of Peter refers to Lot as a righteous man. He's only righteous in a relative sense, namely that he is still shocked by some of the things that are going on in Sodom and considers them wrong. And so in that sense, he's righteous, but we can see that he didn't really want to do much about it. He didn't want to confront the evil, neither did he want to leave it or sever himself from it. He just got attached. And so are all of us, in some way attached to some of the things of this world. Some more than others, but at the end of the day, we got to go through a long process of getting detached and realizing this world ain't it. It's just not enough. It's not, I have an infinite longing and the world is finite. It's not the answer. And so we then begin to ask for and gain a joy and a zeal for the things that God is offering. And we begin to work on setting our sights towards heaven, pitching our tent toward heaven and going that way. And these are the things that we learn from the story of Lot. It's a sad story, but it's also an amazing story of what sloth can do, and also how sin can infect us, and how pitching our tent toward the world is a very pernicious threat that we ought to take seriously. All right, enough said. We'll go on to another story in our next video, but at the end of the day, this is the life of Lot. It is a study in sloth, and that's what this story means for us, and for us to analyze it and find our way out of it. In stages, it takes time, because it's a very deep drive, a very deep wound, if you will, in our souls. And we want to ask God to take our weak and wayward hearts and fix and focus them on the right thing. There's an old song that just says, "Oh, fix me, Lord, fix me, Jesus, fix me for my long white robe, fix me for my starry crown. Oh, fix me, Jesus, fix me."